Simple woman was sold to a giant Viking for money, but he fell for her on the first sight. The wind howled along the cliffs of Eldoria, carrying the scent of salt and wet stone. Waves crashed against jagged rocks far below, echoing a song of sorrow and warning. In the little village perched at the edge of this wild coast, life moved slowly, like the tide. Children played among the narrow cobbled streets, and smoke curled from the chimneys of small wooden cottages. But in one humble home, shadows of desperation lingered heavier than the morning mist. Alara sat on the floor, weaving straw into a small basket, her fingers nimble but trembling. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky in muted gold, but the warmth did nothing to ease her worry. Her father, weary and broken from years of failed harvests and unpaid debts, paced before her. His voice, though soft, carried a weight that made her chest tighten. "Alara, I have no choice," he said, stopping to meet her gaze. His eyes were red-rimmed, tired from worry and sleepless nights. "The debt, it is more than I can bear. They will take everything if I do not pay. I have found a buyer, a strong man from the north. He will give us what we need. It is the only way." Alara's hands froze. She set the half-finished basket aside and looked at him, confusion and fear warring in her chest. "A buyer? Father, what do you mean?" He swallowed hard. He wants you. I know it is cruel. I know it is wrong, but it is the only way to save us, Alara. Think of your mother, think of your brother. We cannot survive otherwise." Her stomach twisted. The words settled on her like cold stones. She wanted to scream, to run, to tell him it was impossible, but she knew the truth in his voice. Their village had suffered, the fields had failed, and the hunger had come too close for comfort. And now she was to pay the price. I understand," she whispered, though her throat burned with unspoken fear. I will do what you must." Her father's eyes glistened with tears, and he reached for her hands. "You are brave, my daughter, more than I could ever be. This will not be forever. I promise you that." By midday, Alara was led down the winding path to the docks, where a ship as large as a small fortress awaited. Its hull was blackened with smoke and salt, and its sails were patched from countless journeys. Standing beside it was the man who would claim her, Rurik, the Viking. He was massive, a towering figure clad in furs and iron. His hair was the color of storm clouds, and his eyes shone like steel under the sunlight. There was a quiet power about him, the kind that made the air feel heavier, and his presence alone made the villagers pause in awe and fear. Rurik's gaze fell upon Alara as she stepped hesitantly toward the ship. She felt as though he could see every fear, every hesitation, every secret thought she had. And in that instant she hated him, and yet there was a strange pull she could not explain. "You are Alara." His voice was deep and slow, each word measured like the beat of a war drum. "Yes, sir," she replied softly, bowing her head. He nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "Your father tells me you are strong, brave, perhaps more than you know." Alara felt heat rise to her cheeks. I will do my best, sir." Rurik gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Good, come then, there is no time to waste." The ship's deck was wide and rough beneath her feet. The smell of salt, wood, and iron filled her senses. Sailors moved with quick efficiency, hauling ropes and securing supplies, their eyes flicking toward her now and then, curious about the quiet woman who had been sold to the giant Viking. Alara's heart pounded. She wanted to turn and run, but the cliffs of her village were far behind her. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction, its waves glittering like shattered glass under the sun. She felt small, fragile, and completely alone. Rurik walked beside her, his steps so heavy they seemed to shake the deck. Yet there was a carefulness in the way he moved, a sense that he did not wish to harm her. "You do not fear me?" he asked, glancing down at her. She looked up, meeting his intense gaze. I do," she admitted. "I'm afraid of the sea, afraid of the unknown, afraid of you." He chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to mix with the crash of the waves. "Good, Fear keeps you alive, and alive is how we begin. The first night aboard the ship was cold. The wind whipped around them, tearing at her thin cloak, and the deck swayed as the longship cut through the rolling waves. Alara huddled near the railing, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. Her thoughts returned to her family, to the life she had lost, to the unknown that awaited her. Rurik approached silently, his massive figure outlined by the pale light of the moon. He stopped beside her, his presence so imposing that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Do you wish to be anywhere else?" he asked softly. Alara looked at him, startled. She expected anger, disdain, or cruelty. Instead, there was curiosity, concern. Something she had not expected from a man like him. I do not know," she said honestly. "I am afraid, yes, but I suppose there is no place for me but here now." Rurik nodded slowly. "Very well, then we endure together." The storm came suddenly, as if the sea itself had decided to test them. Thunder rolled and lightning split the sky. Waves struck the ship with tremendous force, throwing sailors to the deck. Alara shrieked as water drenched her, the cold searing through her clothes. Without hesitation, Rurik grabbed her, lifting her into his massive arms. She felt his strength, solid and unyielding, holding her steady against the chaos around them. "You are safe," he said, his voice calm against the roar of the storm. "I will not let you fall." Alara's heart raced, and for a moment fear gave way to something else, a strange warmth, a flicker of trust. She looked up into his eyes, seeing not just a giant Viking, but a man who, despite his strength and terror, had just saved her. The storm raged on, but within the safety of his arms, Alara felt a fragile sense of hope. Perhaps this journey was not only a path of despair. Perhaps there was more to this giant than she had ever imagined. As the night deepened and the ship sailed onward into the unknown, Alara and Rurik remained close. Words were few, but something passed between them, an understanding, an unspoken connection that neither could yet define. By the time dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving the sea a trembling silver beneath the early light. The ship drifted gently now, the air filled with the cries of seabirds. Alara stood at the railing, her hair wet and tangled, her clothes clinging to her body. She felt small against the vastness of the ocean, yet a strange courage had begun to bloom within her. Rurik watched her silently, his massive frame outlined by the rising sun. "You survived the night," he said simply. "Yes," she replied, meeting his gaze, "and I am still here." He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then turned back to the horizon. But Alara sensed something in him, a shift, subtle yet profound. A spark of interest, perhaps, or something deeper that neither words nor actions had yet revealed. For the first time since leaving her village, Alara did not feel entirely alone. She could not yet call it hope, nor trust, nor affection, but it was something that might grow or might vanish as quickly as the sea mist. And in the quiet aftermath of the storm, as the longship cut through endless waves toward the lands of the north, both Alara and Rurik understood something unspoken. This journey would change them, in ways neither could yet imagine. The cliffs of her village were gone, swallowed by distance and sea. Ahead lay a path of uncertainty, danger, and perhaps discovery. And as the sun climbed higher, painting the world in shades of gold and silver, Alara realized that the life she once knew had ended. And the story that had begun that fateful morning, the story of a simple woman sold to a giant Viking, was only just beginning. The northern winds were colder than anything Alara had ever known. The longship had sailed for days, cutting through gray seas that seemed endless, each wave taller and fiercer than the last. The sky hung heavy with clouds, and the sun was a pale disk, struggling to pierce the gloom. Alara clutched her cloak tightly around her shoulders, shivering despite the warmth of the thick wool. Rurik walked beside her, silent and commanding, his heavy boots striking the wooden deck with a rhythm that echoed like a heartbeat. The sailors moved quickly around them, but they seemed careful not to disturb him or her. She noticed with some surprise that he rarely spoke unless necessary, and when he did, his voice was calm, steady, and filled with authority. Alara had begun to understand that fear was only one part of her feelings toward him. There was curiosity, too, and something stranger, a fluttering warmth when his eyes briefly met hers. Yet she fought it, reminding herself that she was sold, that he was a giant of power and danger, and that she was small, untrained, and vulnerable in this world. The ship docked at last in a fjord that looked as if it had been carved by giants themselves. Jagged cliffs rose on either side, shrouded in mist, and the water was dark, reflecting the gray sky like a mirror. Alara followed Rurik silently, stepping onto the cold stone dock, her heart pounding at the new land before her. "This is our home for now," Rurik said, gesturing toward a fortress in the distance. Its walls were dark stone, towering and unyielding. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of hammers striking metal echoed through the air. The place seemed alive, breathing power and history into the air. Alara's eyes widened. It is so large," she whispered. Rurik nodded. "It is strong because it must be. Many want to test me, and this place keeps them at bay. You will learn its ways. And in return, you must follow the rules. No one disrespects me or survives long here." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Yes, sir." Inside the fortress, life was harsher than the sea. The great hall was enormous, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Warriors trained in the yard, their movements precise and deadly. Servants moved quietly, carrying supplies or cleaning the stone floors. Alara felt both awe and fear. She had never seen such power concentrated in one place. Rurik led her to a small room at the edge of the fortress, sparsely furnished with a bed and a wooden chest. The walls were cold stone, and the air smelled of smoke and iron. "You will stay here," he said simply. "It is not much, but it is safe. You may come and go in the hall or the courtyard, but do not wander beyond the walls." Alara nodded, her fingers brushing the rough wood of the chest. "Thank you." Rurik's gaze lingered on her longer than usual. "Do not mistake kindness for weakness," he said softly. Then he turned and left, his boots echoing down the corridor. Alone, Alara sat on the bed, feeling the weight of her new life pressing down on her. Fear was constant, but so was curiosity. Who was this man, really? Why had he saved her during the storm? Was there more to him than the giant, the warrior, the feared Viking? Days passed, and Alara began to observe Rurik more closely. She saw the way he moved with precision and power, how his gaze could silence a room, how the warriors obeyed his every command without hesitation. And yet, she saw moments of solitude, of quiet reflection, when he seemed not like a giant Viking but like a man trapped by duty, legend, and something darker. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Alara ventured into the courtyard. The cold air bit her cheeks, but she felt alive in a way she had not in years. She saw Rurik alone near the edge of the fortress, staring out over the cliffs. The wind tugged at his hair, and his cloak billowed like a shadow of smoke. "You should not be here," he said without turning, his voice calm but firm. I wanted to see the view," she replied, stepping closer. "It is beautiful in a way I never imagined." He glanced at her, his eyes like steel softened by the twilight. "Beauty is dangerous," he said. "It can distract, make you forget who you are. Here, strength matters more than anything else." Alara shivered, but not from the cold. "And you are strong," she said quietly. "Stronger than anyone I have ever known." Rurik's gaze lingered on her, and for the first time Alara thought she saw a flicker of something human in his eyes, vulnerability perhaps, or loneliness. "Strength," he said slowly, "is a curse as often as a blessing. Those who rely on it too much lose themselves." Alara's curiosity grew, mingled with something like pity and fascination. "Why do you say that?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned his eyes back to the sea, the wind whipping around him. "Because I know," he said at last. "I have seen it happen to men I trusted. And I carry it inside me, a fire I cannot fully control, a darkness that grows when I am weak or angry or alone." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. She did not fully understand what he meant, but the intensity in his voice made her pulse quicken. She had thought him only a giant warrior, a figure of fear and strength. Now she saw another side, a side that was human, fragile, and in need of something she might be able to give. Over the next few days, she tried to learn the ways of the fortress. She observed the warriors, listened to their stories, and began to understand the rules of this harsh world. Rurik allowed her to accompany him on walks around the walls, sometimes speaking in soft tones that carried over the wind. One day, as they walked along the fortress ramparts, Rurik spoke of his curse directly for the first time. "I am bound to battle," he said, his voice carrying over the crashing waves below. "Every fight, every drop of blood I spill, it grows inside me. If I do not find balance, if I do not have someone to keep me grounded, I risk becoming less than human." Alara's heart ached at his words. I do not know if I can help," she said quietly. "I am only a simple woman." He looked down at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Perhaps it is precisely because you are simple that you can. You see the truth in a way others cannot. And sometimes the smallest flame can tame the darkest storm." Her cheeks burned. She did not know how to respond. She felt fear, admiration, and something else, something she could not yet name. It was during a hunting expedition in the forest beyond the fortress that the true danger of Rurik's world revealed itself. The woods were thick with fog, twisted trees forming shadowed paths. Alara followed him carefully, stepping where he indicated, her heart pounding with every sound: the snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of an animal. Suddenly, a spectral beast emerged from the mist, eyes glowing like embers. Its body shimmered unnaturally, moving with speed and grace that no human could match. Alara froze, unable to move, unable to scream. Rurik was faster. He stepped in front of her, his massive frame shielding her from the creature. His sword flashed, striking with precision, but the beast was cunning, dodging with unnatural agility. "Alara, move!" he shouted, his voice fierce yet protective. She stumbled back, her heart racing, and saw her chance. Remembering a path through the trees, she ran, drawing the creature away from Rurik's path. She glanced back, and in that brief moment their eyes met, hers wide with fear and determination, his filled with something she could not yet name: pride, relief, and something softer. Finally, the beast retreated into the fog, disappearing as if it had never been there. Alara stumbled to Rurik, panting, her legs weak. "You are reckless," he said, his voice stern, but his eyes betrayed relief. He placed a large hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "But you saved me." Alara looked up at him, surprised. I saved you," he nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Yes, you have courage more than most. I did not expect it." For a moment the wind seemed to pause, the forest holding its breath. Alara felt the weight of his gaze, the intensity of his presence. Fear, awe, and something more intertwined in her chest, leaving her dizzy and alive all at once. That night, as they returned to the fortress, Alara lay in her small room, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed the events of the day, the way Rurik had protected her, the way he had looked at her in the forest. She did not fully understand the feelings stirring within her, but she knew they were powerful, dangerous, and consuming. Meanwhile, Rurik stood on the ramparts, looking toward the distant horizon. The stars reflected in his eyes, yet they seemed dim compared to the fire that flickered within him, a fire that only she, in some small way, had touched. In silence, they both understood something unspoken. Their fates were becoming intertwined. The bond between them, born of fear, courage, and curiosity, was growing stronger. And in the shadows of the northern fortress, under the cold gaze of the moon and stars, something tender and dangerous began to bloom, a connection neither could ignore. and neither fully understood. The fortress of Rurik stood silent under a pale morning sky, its walls dark and strong, guarding the northern lands against unseen threats. The mist curled along the cliffs like restless spirits, and the sea crashed below with endless fury. Inside the great hall, the air was thick with the scent of iron and smoke. Warriors moved in quiet preparation, checking weapons, sharpening swords, and exchanging glances filled with tension. Alara walked beside Rurik, her steps careful and measured. She had grown accustomed to the fortress, its rules, and the power that Rurik held over all who lived within its walls. Yet, despite her familiarity, she still felt a flutter of fear and excitement when he was near. There was an unspoken gravity in his presence, a force that both drew her in and reminded her of her own smallness in this harsh, unforgiving world. "Today the scouts returned," Rurik said quietly, his voice low and commanding as they walked through the stone corridor. "They bring news of enemies gathering beyond the northern pass. They will test us." Alara looked up at him, worry flickering in her chest. "Enemies? Do you mean soldiers, or something worse?" He studied her for a moment, his steel-gray eyes sharp and calculating. "Perhaps both," he said slowly. "There are men who seek power, men who wish to take what they cannot earn, and there are forces older than men which watch and wait for weakness. We must not give them either." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. The weight of his words pressed upon her like the heavy fog that often clung to the cliffs outside. "And what will we do?" she asked softly. "We prepare," he said simply. "We sharpen our weapons, we guard our walls, and we trust those who stand beside us, including you." Her heart skipped. She was not a warrior, not trained for battle, yet Rurik's words carried an unexpected warmth. He trusted her, and though fear still gripped her, a small spark of courage ignited within her. That evening, the hall was alive with quiet tension. Torches flickered against the stone walls, casting shadows that danced like restless spirits. Rurik sat at the high table, silent and imposing, as the warriors gathered around to discuss strategy. Alara observed from a distance, her hands clasped in front of her, trying to appear calm. Rurik's gaze occasionally flicked to her, sharp and assessing. She felt the weight of it, like the quiet pressure of a mountain upon her chest. It was not a look of ownership or command, but something else, something that made her cheeks warm and her heart beat faster. She could not name it, but she knew it was dangerous in its own way. After the council ended, Rurik approached her. "Come with me," he said, his voice calm but firm. She followed silently, her mind filled with a mixture of fear, anticipation, and curiosity. He led her to the fortress walls, where the wind cut sharply, tugging at her cloak and hair. Below, the sea roared, its waves crashing against the rocks with endless, relentless fury. Rurik leaned against the stone, his gaze distant, as if he were looking not at the horizon but beyond it, to some unseen danger. "Alara," he said finally, his voice softer now, almost intimate. "Do you understand what it means to be close to me?" She hesitated, unsure how to answer. I think so," she said carefully. You are strong, dangerous, but also something else." He turned to look at her fully, the gray light of the sky reflecting in his eyes. "Yes, dangerous," he said quietly, "but also cursed. Every battle I fight, every drop of blood I spill, it changes me. If I do not have someone to keep me grounded, to remind me of what is human, I will lose myself, perhaps forever." Alara felt her heart tighten. She had never seen him like this, open, vulnerable, yet still immense in power. I want to help," she said softly. "Even if I am only a simple woman, I want to be here for you." Rurik's expression softened, and for a moment the giant Viking seemed less fearsome and more human. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, a gesture so gentle it made her gasp. "Then you will need courage," he said quietly. "Courage more than you know you possess. And fear, well, fear will always follow. It is the price of survival here." Alara nodded, feeling a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. She did not yet know how she would face the dangers ahead, but one thing was certain: she would face them by his side. The next day, they ventured into the forest beyond the fortress walls. The northern woods were dark and twisted, their trees gnarled and ancient. Fog clung to the ground, hiding roots and stones that could trip an unwary foot. Rurik moved with certainty, his eyes scanning every shadow, his hand never far from his sword. Ilara followed, her heart pounding. She had practiced the small skills he had taught her, watching his movements, learning to listen to the wind and the sounds of the forest. She was still small and fragile compared to him, but she felt capable. Somehow, in his presence, her fear transformed into determination. "Stay close," Rurik instructed. "The forest is not empty. There are creatures here older than men and men who have lost their way." Ilara nodded, following him closely. For hours they moved silently, their steps in harmony, until a rustle in the trees made them both pause. A figure emerged, a band of marauders armed and hungry, their eyes greedy and cruel. Rurik stepped forward immediately, his presence immense and commanding. Ilara froze, heart racing, but then she remembered his words. Courage. Fear will follow, but courage could save her. The marauders attacked, and Rurik moved like a storm unleashed. His sword struck with power and precision, each movement calculated yet fluid, terrifying in its perfection. Ilara stayed behind him, watching, learning, and for the first time understanding what he had meant when he spoke of strength and danger. A marauder lunged at her, and instinctively she stepped aside, using a fallen branch to block him. She was clumsy, untrained, but her courage and her presence of mind kept her alive. Rurik noticed, and a brief flicker of pride crossed his face as he defeated the last of the attackers. "Ilara," he said quietly afterward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are braver than I imagined, and capable. That will serve you well." She felt her chest swell with a mixture of relief and pride, but also something more, a warmth, a connection, a bond that tightened with every glance, every touch, every shared moment of danger. As night fell, they returned to the fortress, exhausted but alive. The hall was quiet, the warriors already resting. Rurik led her to the walls again, where the wind blew cold and sharp. The stars reflected in the sea below, their light shimmering like distant fire. "Ilara," he said softly, "tonight you will sleep knowing that the world is harsh, that danger waits beyond every shadow, but also that you are not alone. I will protect you, even when the darkness rises, even when my curse threatens to overwhelm me." Ilara's heart raced. I feel safe with you," she whispered, "even though I am afraid." Rurik turned to her fully, his eyes locking with hers. The wind whipped around them, tugging at their cloaks and hair, yet in that moment nothing else existed. Not the fortress, not the sea, not the storm or the shadows. They were alone in a fragile, precious silence. "You are remarkable," he said finally. "Do you know that? For someone so small, so simple, you have a strength that surprises me, that I need." Her cheeks burned, her throat tight. I do not feel remarkable," she said softly. "I only try to survive." He stepped closer, his immense frame casting a shadow over her. "Survival is courage," he said quietly, "and courage sometimes changes everything." The next morning, a scout returned with urgent news. A larger army was moving toward the fortress, and strange omens had been sighted in the north. The sky had turned red at twilight, and creatures of shadow had been glimpsed near the mountains. The hall buzzed with tension, and Rurik gathered his warriors to prepare for the approaching danger. Ilara watched him, her heart heavy but filled with determination. She was no longer merely a simple village girl. She was part of this world now, part of Rurik's life, and part of the struggle that would define both their fates. That night, as she lay in her small room, she thought of the battles ahead. She thought of Rurik, his strength, his curse, and the strange, deepening connection that bound them together. She did not know what the future held, but she knew one thing: she would face it with him. The fortress was silent, but beyond its walls, shadows stirred, and the first whispers of war reached their ears. Danger was coming, and it would test not only their strength but their hearts. The northern sky burned with the light of dawn, though it was no gentle sunrise. Blood-red clouds stretched across the horizon, casting the fortress in a strange, foreboding glow. The air smelled of salt, iron, and smoke. Somewhere in the distance, the first war drums echoed, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to shake the ground and stir the sea. Alara stood at the ramparts beside Rurik, her hair whipping around her face in the cold wind. The fortress had never felt so alive, or so dangerous. Below, the warriors readied themselves, sharpening swords, checking armor, and casting nervous glances toward the approaching army. The tension was palpable, like a coiled spring waiting to release. Rurik's eyes were fixed on the horizon, sharp and calculating. His massive frame was calm, yet beneath that calm, a storm roared. The curse he carried, the fire that grew with every battle, was stirring. He could feel it like a heat behind his ribs, ready to consume him if he lost control. "Alara," he said, his voice low but carrying over the wind, "the coming fight, it will test more than our strength. It will test our hearts, our courage, our trust." She looked up at him, her heart pounding. "I will be with you," she said firmly, "no matter what comes." A brief flicker of something, pride, relief, and something deeper crossed his face. "Then you must trust me," he said quietly. "And you must trust yourself. Fear will come. Anger will come, but you cannot let it rule you." Alara nodded, gripping the railing tightly. She had learned so much from him, watched him move through the fortress and forest with power and precision, seen him face danger without hesitation. And yet, standing here now, she realized that the greatest danger was not the approaching army, but the fire within Rurik, and the possibility that she could lose him to it. The morning passed slowly, each minute stretched taut with anticipation. Scouts returned with news. The enemy had reached the mountains, a massive force moving like a shadow across the northern pass. Strange signs accompanied them, storms that did not obey the wind, whispers of unnatural creatures moving among the trees. Rurik gathered his warriors in the hall, his presence alone silencing the room. He spoke briefly, his words few but precise, each carrying authority and warning. Alara watched from the corner, her chest tight with fear and awe. He was a giant among men, yet she had seen the humanity in him, the side that cared, that protected, that struggled with the darkness inside. When the council ended, he took her hand, a gesture so rare it startled her. "Tonight," he said quietly, "we face more than men. We face the shadows of the world. Stay close to me, trust your instincts and trust me." She nodded, gripping his hand tightly. The warmth of his fingers sent a shiver through her, a strange mix of fear, comfort, and longing. The battle began at dusk. The northern pass was cloaked in mist, the enemy moving silently yet with deadly purpose. Rurik led his warriors, his sword flashing like lightning, his presence commanding the tide of combat. Alara followed closely, her hands trembling but her resolve firm. She had learned to move with him, anticipate his actions, and rely on her courage to guide her. The enemy attacked with precision, but Rurik's warriors were disciplined and fierce. Still, the fight was not against men alone. The curse he carried manifested in the heat of battle, a dark fire that threatened to consume him. Every strike he made was both a blow against the enemy and a battle against the monster inside him. Alara stayed near him, her eyes wide as she watched him fight. He was terrifying, unstoppable, and yet human. She realized in that moment that he was the only one who could control the fire, the only one who could wield his curse without being destroyed by it. And she knew that if she faltered, if she lost faith in him, he might fall to it. A massive shadow moved through the fog, a creature larger than any man, its eyes glowing like embers. It attacked with unnatural speed, striking down warriors as if they were nothing. Rurik met it with a roar, his sword striking true, but the force of the creature was immense. "Alara!" he shouted over the chaos. Now her heart pounded. She knew what he meant. trust, courage, action. She moved with instinct, grabbing a fallen branch and using it to distract the creature, guiding it away from him for a brief moment. Rurik seized the opportunity, striking with power and precision, finally forcing the beast to retreat into the mist. He turned to her, his chest heaving, sweat and blood mixing on his skin. "You saved me," he said quietly, his eyes locking onto hers. There was no sarcasm, no mockery, only something raw, human, and unyielding. I helped," she said, voice trembling. "I had to." He stepped closer, the fire of the battle still flickering in his eyes, yet tempered by something softer, trust, connection, something she could not yet name. "You are more than you realize," he said. "Courage, that is a power no sword can give, and you have it." The night was long, filled with the sounds of distant skirmishes, the cries of men, and the restless wind that carried the scent of the mountains. Rurik and Alara stood together on the fortress walls, watching the distant fires of the enemy camps. Her hands rested on the stone, cold but steady, yet she felt the warmth of his presence beside her like a shield. "Alara," he said softly, "the curse, it grows stronger when I fight. But you keep me grounded. You remind me of who I am, of what I must be." She looked up at him, her heart tight with emotion. I do not want you to be lost to it," she said quietly. "Not ever." His gaze softened, and for a moment the giant Viking seemed smaller, more human than she had ever seen him. He placed a hand over hers, their fingers intertwining. "Then stay with me," he whispered. "Through the night, through the storm, through everything. Stay with me, and together we can survive." Alara nodded, tears threatening to fall, her chest swelling with fear, love, and determination. "I will," she said. "I promise." The final confrontation came at dawn. The enemy had reached the fortress walls, and the sky was dark with smoke and shadow. Warriors clashed, swords ringing against shields, the cries of men echoing across the cliffs. Rurik moved like a force of nature, his curse flaring, yet controlled by the bond he shared with Alara. She stayed close, guiding him, warning him, sharing in his struggle. The fire within him raged, threatening to consume everything, but her presence anchored him, gave him reason to fight without losing himself. In the heat of battle, Rurik faced the leader of the enemy forces, a dark figure, cloaked and monstrous, wielding power that seemed to echo the curse he carried. Their swords clashed, sparks flying, each strike a test of strength and will. Alara watched, her heart in her throat, then acted. She found a weak point, a path that allowed Rurik to strike with precision. The dark figure faltered, and with a final, mighty blow, Rurik defeated him. The fire of the curse ebbed, controlled and tempered by the bond they shared, the trust and courage that had grown between them. When the battle ended, the northern sun rose, casting light over the fortress and the wounded battlefield. Warriors tended the injured, and silence replaced the cries of combat. Rurik stood, exhausted but alive, his sword in hand. He turned to Alara, whose face was streaked with sweat and dirt, yet shone with pride and relief. "You stayed with me," he said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. "Even when danger came, even when fear pressed close, you saved me in ways you cannot yet understand." Alara stepped closer, her hand brushing his. "We saved each other," she said softly. "You gave me courage, and I gave you something to fight for." Rurik's eyes softened, a rare smile touching his lips. "Perhaps that is the true power," he said. "Not strength, not battle, but trust, courage, and the heart of someone who believes in you." For a long moment they stood together, the wind carrying the scent of the sea and the mountains, the fortress standing strong behind them. The curse was not gone, but it was tempered. The darkness had not vanished, but with courage and trust, it could be faced. Alara realized then that she was no longer the simple village girl she had been. She was part of a story larger than herself, a story of courage, love, and redemption. And Rurik, the giant Viking, was no longer a figure of fear, but of humanity, strength, and the capacity for change. As the day warmed, Rurik lifted Alara into his arms, the bond between them solid, unspoken, and powerful. The fortress stood behind them, the sea stretched before them, and the wind carried the promise of new beginnings. "You are remarkable," he whispered, holding her close, "and I will not lose you to darkness." Alara rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her. "And I will never leave you," she whispered back. The storm had passed. The curse had been tempered. And though shadows might always linger, the bond they shared, trust, courage, and love, would endure beyond legend, beyond fear, and beyond the trials of the world.